Today I'm going to talk to you about the scheduling section of BetOven. As you can see, it's the fourth tab within the BetOven app. What does this tab or this setting allow us? Basically, it creates a schedule for BetOven to connect and disconnect at each of your bookies and perform tasks at specific intervals. This way you don't have to start and stop BetOven to keep working. I have to tell you something. There are some betting houses that have login issues, as you know, especially those that have CAPTCHAs. That hidden CAPTCHA that can sometimes appear and make it impossible for you to log in correctly. The rest of the betting houses usually log in normally and won't cause you any problems. In this case, what I recommend is that you remove these betting houses from this section. I'm going to show you how you can set it up. This setting, as you'll see, is very simple. Basically, what we need to do is choose which bookmakers we want and what range we want of work. To get started, the first thing you need to do is create a new setup. To do this, go to this tab and we'll just put configs as. You see, it appears. This menu is completely blank. The first thing I recommend you do is basically to create a global interval. Why global? Because this way we can set up all the betting houses at once. Imagine that you want to work with several betting houses like, for example, Intabeten, Kirolbet, Wegen, and Retabet. What do we have in this menu? Basically, the days of the week when we want to work this way, that is, let's imagine we want to work with all the days. We could also select all the bookies, but as I mentioned, it can cause you problems when working. So we simply choose all the days. If we want to work on a specific day with another interval, then simply we choose the days of the week we want to work with. For example, the weekend, if we want to work a bit more, well, we can modify it. And the important thing is to start and end the time interval on the same day. That is, if you're going to work at night, for example, from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m., keep in mind that your interval always has to end before midnight of that day. That is, for instance, let's envision we want to work an interval that starts at 11:30 in the morning. And that it ends, for example, at 9 at night. We would simply select 9. We would go to the minutes and save it. This way, we would already have an interval created for these specific bookies. Imagine that you want to add another one. We've set until 9 and we want to add one for the night. Let's imagine that we select those same bookmakers or simply choose another set of houses. We say that this set of houses is every day and we want it to be until 2 a.m. So if we want to work from 2 a.m., we will have to work from midnight until 2 a.m. In the early morning until 2 a.m. If you notice, I always work in time intervals that are from what would be 0 from midnight until 2 a.m. If we wanted to add an interval before midnight, for example, from 10 to 11, we would have to add this interval. We would simply add a new one. Globally, we would select the same bookies. And we would go here and add, for example, from 11 p.m. until midnight, which in this case would be 11:59 p.m. This way, as you can see, we always work within that day's interval. At the moment, we set an interval like, for example, 1 in the morning or 12, just after 12. In the morning, what we're telling it doesn't make sense. It's going to tell us that this interval can't be set. When we go to save it, it's going to tell us no. Why? Because this, let's say, changing from one day to the next. However, if we set, as I mentioned to you, at 11:59. In the evening, it won't give us any problems. One last thing. If you notice, we've talked about the random offset is basically what we do here is that in all our settings, I recommend that no matter what configuration you add and what interval you add, always include an offset. This offset is useful so that it starts and ends at a random interval. Sooner or later, let's imagine we said 11:23. Well, BetOven is going to start from 11:23 to 11:33 in a random interval, meaning it can start at 11:30 or it can start at 11:25. The interval is always going to be changing so that it never connects and ends at the same time, so that it always has some randomization. If we go, for example, to this one, we could add, for example, 11 in the morning, well, until 1 p.m. We would add it. What's happening? That in this case, by adding these intervals and having been working with similar intervals, it could give us a problem because the intervals might overlap. If that happens, a message will pop up telling us that the intervals are overlapping. Keep that in mind. You can't overlap two work intervals. Create a work interval and then create another one, but make sure they don't overlap, meaning there are not two intervals that overlap. It's important for you to keep this in mind. Here, for example, it tells us that both intervals are overlapping. In this case, it can cause us problems. I always recommend that you plan out first what intervals you're going to set, with which betting houses you're going to establish those intervals, and then create the configuration. Once that configuration is created, we just need to enable it. What will happen the moment we add these bookies and add this configuration? The betting houses that are set up within the schedule, many times, or especially at the beginning, they will show up with the status sign saying waiting. Don't worry, this is completely normal. It's simply going to be waiting until it connects. At first, many times we might find ourselves within that offset period that we've set, and it still doesn't connect even though we think it's within our interval. Keep in mind this offset period, and after a while you'll see that they connect and there won't be any problems. As I mentioned, this parameter, this schedule configuration is very interesting, but keep in mind that it can cause login issues and may cause your profile to get stuck. So if you have betting houses that give you login problems like Winamax or others, due to CAPTCHA, keep this in mind and don't include them within this schedule. That's it. Since it's very simple, you just need to keep a few little things in mind. And with this, that would be all. What do you want? Delete the intervals and reconfigure it. Well, simply, you delete them all and it will leave you with a completely new configuration. We can delete the configuration and we can create new configurations. That's all. I hope this has been helpful for you, that you use these schedules when you see fit. If you're interested, for example, in not working for very long periods of time, and that BetOven is the one who starts and stops your profile every day. As you already know, working with schedules allows us to stretch the life of our accounts a bit, because limitations won't come so early if we have a more normal job. Of course, if you have huge intervals, you don't really care, but it is interesting above all, so that when the bookmakers see our connection intervals, they see that we have at least human connection intervals. That's all. See you in the next video.